On today's show, my name is Spencer Wolf. We're covering a plan made by President Trump to close the border with Mexico, a women's accusation against Joe Biden, and the details of New York State's pretty major $175 billion budget, as well as the death of rapper Nipsey Hussle, opioids, Brexit votes, and so much more. All right. Yeah, that's what's going on today. But, of course, we start with the top, and it would take really something dramatic for Trump to not close parts of the U.S.-Mexico border this week, the acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney said on the Sunday show. So, yeah, this thing's most likely going to be closed. The president has also ordered the State Department to cut off aid to 3 Central American countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, saying they're not doing enough to stop migrants heading north, literally as Christian Nielsen was negotiating plan with them to help stop migrants from coming north, which to me is absolutely hilarious about how bad and incompetent this whole administration is being run. And again, like, literally, guess where the money was going to? It was going to jobs, it was going to stopping violence, and it was going to education, or some 3 important pillars of society, and pretty much served to help stop all the reasons why migrants were coming over. Probably why, now if you put it together, probably why the U.S. Decided to give those in the first place. That's probably why they decided to provide those resources in the first place. So that is why it really makes no sense to see people like Donald Trump saying, "Oh yeah, they've done nothing. We need to close the border. We need to close the border." This is unbelievably stupid. Yeah. Last month, though, 76,000 people were apprehended crossing the border, an 11-year high, and we're going to get higher than that once this money stops kicking in. You can mark my word for it. Mark my words here. It's just basic logic that a 5-year-old could figure out. Federal immigration officials appear to have emptied an outdoor enclosure in El Paso, where hundreds of families of asylum seekers have been detained after a pretty outcry there. After an outcry there, Pope Francis said yesterday that those who close borders will become prisoners of the walls they build. I don't think Trump really cares about that. But the good news is, though, migrants have been mostly moved out at this point in time. So, so federal immigration officials appear to have cleared out that enclosure under a bridge, literally under a bridge. That's where they kept them. That's rough. But authorities appear to have shifted some processing of migrants to another site on the other side of the bridge using a military-style tent near an existing processing facility operated by Customs and Border Protection. So yeah, again, the reason why this is happening is because of Trump's immigration policies. Nothing to do with Obama, just the way it works and how incompetently from the beginning they've handled this, which is it's really a sight to behold, frankly, is what it is. Yeah, that border could be closed. Let's find a little bit more briefly about that and some of the costs it would be on both sides. Interesting remarks from Glenn Bradford about this was how, quote, on this front, it would, he says last night, President Trump is threatening to close the southern border this week in an effort to intimidate the Mexican government into stopping immigrant caravans. Closing the border would stop the flow of trade between two countries and preventing immigrants from seeking asylum. So yeah, that's pretty much all they're going to do, and they're really going to, again, they're probably going to stop the flow of trade. It's going to threaten billions of dollars in daily trade of what goes on between the two borders. Probably what Trump thinks is, I mean, if I had to guess, he'd be like, oh, Mexico, that's just only when the immigrants come from. Nothing important to our country comes from there. Oh, totally. It'll be fine to shut them down. There's no jobs there. There's no factory plants there. That literally all the car companies that have been outsourcing jobs under Trump's administration, which, by the way, as I'm sure you know, he promised would not happen, they're all going to Mexico. So the fact that shutting down those borders would stop the free flow of trade, that would stop American cars from getting to Americans, it would hurt American manufacturers. So it's definitely going to be really, really rough if that does happen. So here's Mick Mulvaney explaining that this most likely, again, will, barring any really unexpected circumstances, will happen. Here he is on This Week.
Okay, let's move on. The president threatened shutting down entirely the Mexican border as soon as this upcoming week. He obviously made the same threat back in December. What would it take for him not to do that this week?
Something dramatic. Keep in mind, when Jay Johnson says it's a crisis, I hope people now believe us. A lot of folks, many folks in the media, not you necessarily, but a lot of other networks they didn't believe us. Democrats didn't believe us a month ago, 2 months ago, when we said what was happening at the border was a crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a security crisis. And I'm very glad to see that Jay Johnson now at least is admitting that we were right and that 100,000 people coming across the border this month, that's not a made-up number, by the way, despite the fact that many Democrats still think that it is. That is a crisis. Why are we talking about closing the border? Because not for spite and not to try and undo what's happening, but to simply say, look, we need the people from the ports of entry to go out and patrol in the desert where we don't have any wall. We hate to say we told you so, but we told you so. We need border security, and we're going to do the best we can with what we have. The Democrats.
Yeah, so again, this is really kind of a lot of stuff, parts disingenuous coming from Mick Mulvaney. So, but the thing is, like, Trump's attempt to seal off the border by building a wall and mulling the closure of ports to tamp down immigration and drug smuggling is at odds with the dang reality. Smuggling activity largely comes through ports of entry, according to government data, and the president's move to cut off aid to Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador ignores a long-standing strategy touted by aid groups and military experts, including the president's former chief of staff, that supporting those countries actually makes the border safer because, again, less people would want to come across the border. Okay. Yeah, so we now turn to Joe Biden, who is facing a crisis over touching. The former vice president defended himself on Sunday after kissing and touching accusations from a former Nevada legislator Lucy Flores during a campaign rally in 2014. Biden, who is expected to announce a 2020 presidential campaign this month, issued a statement acknowledging that he engaged in expressions of affection towards people, but said, not once, never, did I believe I had acted inappropriately. So, yeah, Lucy Flores, though, has had quite a political career, and her recent attempts to speak out about social justice, sexism, and harassment are really definitely worth another look into. Check out this profile of her. It's very interesting on the New York Times. Go check that out. Another thing to take a look at around 2020 is that several Democratic candidates are focused on attracting small donors to prove their grassroots appeal, but they're also privately courting some pretty major donors as well. Some of them include Cory Booker, Christian Gillibrand, Kamala Harris. They are all not really quite swearing off those small dollar donations. Some of the only few candidates who actually are Warren, Sanders, and from reading that article the Times posted, that's pretty much all I can find. So, all right, yeah. It's a little brief flash update on 2020, but now we turn to the New York budget. Very interesting what's going on in New York, where the state legislature and Governor Andrew Cuomo agreed on Sunday to a $175 billion budget intended to change the way millions of Americans commute, shop, and vote. The deal, which Cuomo hailed as transformative, includes a congestion pricing plan with a toll for vehicles traveling below the 60th Street. How much it'll be, and which vehicles might be exempt is yet to be decided at this point, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on. But other provisions include a ban on plastic bags, but not, as activists has hope, measures to legalize recreational use of marijuana. So that could be in the future, though. This is what we do know. So some of the important things to know, again, are the fact that congestion pricing is already here. The failure of legal weed is also another very big deal for this very big budget. Another thing is, just to get more on that, well-financed medical marijuana companies wanted really a stake in this. So did progressive black lawmakers who opposed any bill and did not guarantee returns for their communities, which have been disproportionately jailed for marijuana offenses. And so there was really some powerful support, some powerful backing on this. Even though activists made a huge last-minute push, hundreds of people walked through the Capitol last week loudly chanting for legalized marijuana, it was ultimately not included in the state budget there. So there is still a chance it could be passed in the remaining months of session, but it may be harder to force a vote without a looming budget deadline. And while there's always next year, 2020 is an election year, and few lawmakers are keen on taking up controversial votes while up for re-election. So this is a pretty big deal. Small donors will have a louder voice in elections, possibly. One of the striking outcomes of last year's election was that many incumbents in New York, if you don't know, some of the most right-wing Democrats were unseated in the state legislature, despite deeper pockets and in many cases party support. They're called the IDC. They were defeated in pretty shocking upset in the New York state primaries. The challengers who replaced them vowed to push for small donor matching systems, which would elevate the voices of everyday New Yorkers over mega donors and could encourage more upsets in the future. The budget guarantees a small donor match system, but leaves the details to a really newly created commission, which would determine the key details of the ratio of the match and contribution limits. The commission would create a program like New York City's, which matches donations at 6-1. That would make New York the first state in the program to have a robust matching program, or it could create a toothless program that effectively keeps the old system in place. So that's going to be another interesting part from this budget. There will be new taxes on the rich, which is very interesting. So after the billionaire Kenneth Griffin bought a $238 million penthouse in Manhattan, the most anyone had ever paid for a home in the U.S., a simmering anger on income inequality turned into a sudden momentum for a pied-à-terre tax, which would tax ultra-luxury second homes above $5 million. So, the powerful real estate industry, which has funded many officials' campaigns, sprang into action in defense of this. They especially opposed the recurring nature of the tax, which developers warned would devastate the high-end market. Oh no. Tax experts also said the proposal would be difficult to implement on the top of the city's antiquated tax property system. So a compromise emerged. The state called it a mansion tax, and those taxes will be one-time fees and raise a combined $365 million. So not quite, but still, another tax is always not bad. All right, so yeah, we turn from New York to Missouri, just the Midwest in general. So the recent flooding there has damaged hundreds of miles of levees, reigniting debate that's gone on for generations there. How should rivers be controlled? Who gets to decide, and how much protection should be given to those most vulnerable? The levees are aging, subject to uneven regulation, and in many cases were never designed to withstand water levels seen in the past decade. Some residents said living and farming in a part of the region may not even be viable without major changes. Every event seems like it's higher, said one farmer in Missouri. It's higher water. You build the levee higher, the next time you build it high, you can't keep up with it. All right, a great piece now in the New York Times, where recent litigation over the sale and promotion of opioids takes aim to the Sackler family, whose network of trusts and companies include Purdue Pharma, the maker of the highly addictive opioid OxyContin. Cases in New York and Massachusetts add detail to accusations that some Sacklers promoted the drug even after learning of its dangers. They highlight a new element in the affair, how members of the family realized that they could increase profits as the opioid crisis grew more lethal by selling treatment for addiction. Yeah, that's definitely a really kind of potent story that affects a lot of people, and how really the Sacklers tried to, in their intense amounts of greed, tried to corner the market, suck off everything else, and proclaim themselves kind of the controllers of this opioid crisis here. All right, so yeah, it's all very tough stuff, but now we're going to move to quick hits on the news today. China announced that it would treat all variants of the powerful opiate fentanyl as controlled substances, making good on a pledge President Xi Jinping made to President Trump last year. Yes, again, the Brexit votes will continue in the British Parliament, set up to try today to find an alternative to Prime Minister Theresa May's plan for withdrawing the country from the EU, which lawmakers rejected for a third time last week. International elections in Turkey, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, said that wrong, sorry, Kenan, his party is poised to lose mayoral races in the capital, Ankara, and his hometown, Istanbul. A comedian leading candidate in the presidential election was the leading candidate in the presidential election in Ukraine, and Zuzana Kaputova was elected the first female president of Slovakia. So it's some